Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making a chocolate chip cookie cake. So this is a fun one for parties. I've basically taken some of my favorite components from the best chocolate chip cookie recipes, and I have transformed them into a giant 10 or 9-inch cookie cake. This is really fun for people who don't love classic cakes for parties, so let's get started by preheating our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now in a large mixing bowl, we're going to combine 3/4 cup of unsalted butter, and this should be softened. When I say softened, I don't mean melty. You don't want it to be greasy or anything like that. You want it to be approaching room temperature. And I'll hold on to those butter wrappers because we're going to need them in a little bit. We're going to repurpose them. And then for our sugar, we're going to start with 3/4 cup of brown sugar, firmly packed brown sugar. I am using light brown sugar, but sometimes I like to mix it up and do a blend of light and dark brown sugar. You can do whichever you prefer. We're also going to be adding 2/3 cup of granulated sugar. Today's recipe could totally be made in your stand mixer with a paddle attachment, but today I'm going to be using my electric hand mixer instead. We'll cream together the butter and sugars until everything is nicely combined. All right. Light and fluffy and sort of creamy is what we're looking for here. There are no discernible butter chunks remaining, all the sugar's nicely incorporated. So we can move on to our next ingredient, which is 1 large egg and 1 large egg yolk. This extra egg yolk is going to make the cookie more moist and tender. If we were also to add the white with this, we would end up with a cookie cake that was more dry and cakey, which even though it's a cookie cake, we don't want it to be too cakey. So let's go ahead and add our first egg, crack our first egg. If I didn't already mention it, ideally your eggs should be at room temperature, same temperature as your butter. There's our egg. Oh my goodness, a shell. I cracked it in a separate bowl and I still got shell in it. I'm a professional. And then we're going to separate out that yolk over here. Pass it back and forth. And look at that color difference. My chickens are fed the same thing. They live in the same place. Not really sure why one seems to be eating better than the other. But anyway, we're going to flavor our cookie cake with a teaspoon of vanilla extract. We'll go ahead and stir everything in until it's nicely combined. Okay, once that's nicely combined, just set it aside. Hopefully nothing falls off my counter. And you're going to need a separate bowl for your dry ingredients. We're going to start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. We're also going to add 1.5 teaspoons of cornstarch. Cornstarch is one of my favorite secret ingredients with cookies. I use it in my worst chocolate chip cookies because it is another ingredient that helps keep the cookie tender, keeps it from spreading too much. It just really lends itself to a nice final product and a nice interior texture. Now we'll also add a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and that's a tablespoon, 3/4 teaspoon of salt. That would have been messy. Sorry, I drop everything when I'm pregnant. We'll whisk these ingredients together. We want to especially make sure that baking powder is nicely distributed. And then we are going to gradually stir our dry ingredients into our butter mixture here. And I do like to do this in like 3 or 4 parts. If you add all of the flour at one time, you can end up overwhelming your cookie dough, which can make it drier than it should be, harder to combine everything. So just be patient and add it a bit at a time. And I'm not the most patient person, so I do understand just wanting to dump it all in and move on. Cookie dough in those beaters, and I want that in my cookie cake. I don't want to leave it behind, so I'm just gonna scrape some of that out. Okay, so I'm going to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. I want to make sure there are no dry ingredients remaining, that everything is looking uniform and well combined, which it is. So next we will add our chocolate chips. I have a cup of chocolate chips here. These are semi-sweet. I'm not gonna put all of them in, I'm gonna save a couple for the top. And because this is a cookie cake, and I firmly believe cakes need sprinkles, I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of sprinkles into here as well. It just looks like a party with the sprinkles. Now it is fit for a celebration. And the dough's a little stiff, it should be. Chocolate chip didn't wanna participate. All right, and let's talk for a second. about the pan that we'll be baking this in. Typically, I prefer to make this cookie cake in a 10-inch springform pan just because it's going to give you a larger cake, but my 10-inch springform pan has recently disappeared. So until then, I make it in a 9-inch springform pan. Either one will work. Obviously, the cake will just be a little bit thicker in a 9-inch. So I've lined the bottom with parchment paper. This is a non-stick pan, but I'm still going to use my butter wrappers and just grease the sides with a little bit of butter, which is just going to help keep the cake from sticking. If you forgot your butter wrappers, you could just use a baking spray or a little bit of shortening instead. And if your pan is not a non-stick pan, I'd probably recommend lightly greasing and flouring the pan. All right, now this is a pretty stiff dough, so I'll start by trying to spread it into the pan. I'll make an effort, get it mostly distributed. I'll start with my spatula, but the back of a spoon works a little bit better to evenly distribute it just because it's firmer. Just make sure you spread that evenly. And for an even prettier appearance, you can take a piece of wax paper or parchment paper and then use your hands to smooth the top. Not a necessary step, just makes it look a little prettier. And then of course, remove that wax paper, get rid of it. Now, if you recall, I had reserved some of those chocolate chips. Just gonna sprinkle them over the cookie cake before it goes in the oven. And they'll sink a bit, so I'll probably save a couple to add after it comes out of the oven too. But again, that's just because I'm kind of a perfectionist about my cakes. Like I want them to look pretty. So if you're just eating it and you don't care about that, that's fine too. All right, we'll take this over to our 350-degree Fahrenheit preheated oven. It's going to be baking in the center rack. For a 10-inch pan, you will be baking it for about 30 minutes. For a 9-inch pan, we're going to be baking it for about 35 minutes. I do like to use the toothpick test. A toothpick inserted in the center should come out with some moist fudgy crumbs or clean. I'd say moist crumbs probably, or clean. That's how you know it's done. You may also notice some light golden browning on the top. Always be careful if you put your toothpick into a chocolate chip. That is not really going to tell you anything because the chocolate's going to be melty. And if you want to add these extra chocolate chips, cover up that toothpick hole, do it while the cookie is still warm. All right, now the cookie cake does need to cool completely before you can add the frosting, but while it cools, let's head over and do that. So it wouldn't be a cake without a frosting, right? So while our cookie cake is cooling, we're going to go ahead and make a very simple chocolate buttercream that works so well with this cake. We'll start with a half cup of butter. I'm using salted butter today, but if you're using unsalted, just add a pinch of salt in with that. And before we add the other ingredients, I like to beat the butter until it is smooth and creamy. Once again, I'm using butter that's softened, but it's not melty or oily because that would make our frosting in turn melty and oily. Let's mix this up. And once that's nicely beaten, we're going to gradually add in our powdered sugar. Try to do this one-handed. And I have 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. It's like 190 grams. If you're using grams, which you really should be, use a kitchen scale. And hopefully by adding this gradually, I will avoid ending up wearing it. I always get a little impatient when I'm adding the sugar. The last bit. All right, and I want a chocolate buttercream, so we're going to add 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. This is natural cocoa. Stir this in. Whoa, I didn't wear the sugar, but I'm wearing the cocoa powder. It's fine. Should have been a little more gradual. All right, next we're going to add just a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Mix that in. All right, and then grab your spatula and we're going to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. I want to make sure there's no cocoa powder or sugar hiding in here. And as you're scraping it, get a feel for the consistency as well. This is pretty stiff, which I expect it to be at this point. So I want to thin it a little bit so that I have a silkier frosting that just pipes a little bit nicer on the cake. I'm just going to add like a splash of milk at a time. You could use milk or heavy cream. You could use any kind of milk you have in your fridge. Just know that the lower the fat the milk is, the less you will need to add because it's thinner. So I'm gonna add a splash, it's like 2 teaspoons. We'll mix this in. Do another quick consistency check. And once I'm happy with the consistency, which I am, I'm just going to put this in a large piping bag. I want to pipe it on top of my cake. I'm using the 846 tip today. You can use whichever you would like. So of course we need to wait for the cookie cake to cool completely, but once it has, we can decorate it. It should remove very easily from the springform pan. If you want to put it on a serving platter, you should be able to carefully move it there now. I'm just going to leave it in this, and I'll add my frosting on top. And I really like to use these closed starred tips for just about any occasion where I'm using frosting, and I think I mentioned this is the Attico 846. A little bit extra. We'll do a couple more sprinkles on top because why wouldn't we? All right, let's cut in. Take a peek at the texture. Now, if you were to cut into this when it was too warm, it would look pretty gooey in the center. So make sure it cools completely. Not that there's anything wrong with gooey. And there you have it. That is how you make my favorite chocolate chip cookie cake. If you try it, let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. You can pick this up and bite it, but we're gonna be fancy. That's good. It's a good cake.